Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. We are beginning our webcast for Broadband Breakfast Live Online. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and very excited to welcome a panel of, I can't really call them Washington insiders because some of them are not in Washington, but they are very attuned to the issues associated with policy deployment in Washington, and they will be able to speak to our perhaps unique topic involving Congress, net neutrality, and privacy. Um, as part of Broadband Breakfast, we always try to be on the news and ahead of the news. And sometimes it means scheduling things in advance or thinking about things in advance. And I've certainly been thinking about net neutrality for some time. And it's been in the news for 2, 3, 4 months since FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel put that squarely on the agenda as something that the FCC intends to do. The question about whether it will be tackled by Congress looms always in the background, and the issue of privacy legislation also is pretty much always before Congress too, when it comes to issues around technology and broadband policy. That's what we focus on here at Broadband Breakfast. We are all about better broadband, better lives. And for us, that means focusing on both the infrastructure and the access and use of it. And so we've had several of our panelists on other programs on other topics, from the Affordable Connectivity Program to Universal Service Fund, from digital discrimination to Section 230, and very excited to welcome several of them back. But before I do that, I want to just call out a couple of things that are available and coming forth in the near future from Broadband Breakfast. First of all is our Broadband Measurement Summit. You can find this across the top bar of Broadband Breakfast. The Broadband Measurement Summit will be held in person on March 7th. That's about 4 weeks from now at Clydesdale Gallery Place. And we're going to be bringing together experts on understanding broadband speeds, prices, availability, reliability, and competition, with panels including the challenge process for state broadband offices. We had a great discussion here in Broadband Breakfast Live Online last week on that topic. We'll talk in panel 2 on the value of mapping assets beyond the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. We'll be speaking about the FCC's broadband nutrition labels. Again, another topic that many of our panelists here are familiar with too. And then we're going to close out with measuring and tracking broadband pricing. So these are among the topics that we'll be tackling at the Broadband Measurement Summit. The event is sponsored by Broadband Now, broadbandtoolkit.com, and Ookla. We're really excited to have them and many others as part of this conversation. That's on March 7th, 4 weeks from now. And before then, in the lead up to it, we're going to be tackling in our free weekly program, this one, Broadband Breakfast Live Online. We're going to be streaming from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance's Net Inclusion event next week, next Wednesday, Valentine's Day, from Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And then the week after, we'll be talking about social media in the Supreme Court. This is on the occasion of very significant cases, the Florida and Texas state laws involving social media, and that will be the subject of our event. And then the week following, February 28th, kind of again, leading up to the Broadband Measurement Summit, we'll be discussing broadband mapping and broadband labels. You can always watch our live online events for free at broadbandbreakfast.com. We would not be able to do these events without the support of our sponsors, and they include Utopia Fiber, Broadband Money, Comcast, SmartWave Technologies, Ookla, Wesco, Who's Systems, WISPA, the Association for Broadband Without Boundaries, Community Broadband Networks Initiative of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, California Emerging Technology Fund, Broadband Toolkit, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, and Michael Baker International. Thank you to our sponsors. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and open the view up to each of our panelists for the discussion. And I want to give each of them a short introduction focused on their expertise in this topic. And then we're going to have each of them give opening statements of up to 5 minutes on their perspective on the intersection of these two issues. That is to say, net neutrality and privacy. All right, so first up, we will be hearing from Harold Feld, and Harold is extremely knowledgeable on this topic and many topics related to it, and more particularly as the Senior Vice President at Public Knowledge, he's been a tireless advocate for freedom, free expression, an open internet, and access to affordable communications tools and creative works. And really, there's no one who knows these issues better, in my opinion, than Harold. So thank you for being with us. Harold, I know you're a repeat visitor on these programs, so thank you. We're going to be followed, or Harold will be followed after he gives his opening remarks. We're going to hear from Rosalind Layton. Rosalind is the Executive Vice President of Strand Consult and a visiting research at Aalborg University's Center for Communications, Media, and Information Technologies in Denmark. And she leads Strand Consult's global project for broadband cost recovery, fair share, and affordability that studies business models and policy. And she wrote a PhD on net neutrality and innovation across 53 countries, and has also been chair of the TPRC, a very significant event. I don't know if you're still affiliated with American think tanks, but I have known her through that linkage. And Rosalind, I know you're coming to us from overseas, so we're really happy to welcome you to this discussion. Thank you for being with us. Following Rosalind, we're going to hear from Matt Wood. Matt is the Vice President of Policy and the General Counsel at Free Press, and he's helped to shape Free Press's advocacy of the open internet, prevent media concentration, promote broadband affordability, and safeguard press freedom. And he also worked at the Media Access Project, as well as 2 law firms in Washington. And he was also editor-in-chief of the Harvard Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review, which I've actually read before. So Matt, excited to have you on the program. And then batting cleanup will be Eric Fruits. Eric is a PhD and senior scholar at the International Center for Law and Economics. And he focuses there on telecom and competition policy. He's written extensively on the Affordable Connectivity Program and BEAD, which of course I mentioned earlier, as well as the FCC's recent digital discrimination rules. And this is his view of the open internet. He says, his proposal to regulate broadband under Title II. So we have different words for the same thing, right? Open internet to some, proposal to regulate broadband under Title II for others. So we'll hear more about that, I'm sure, from the panelists. Now, this is not framed as a debate per se, but obviously we will have conflicting points of view on it. And again, I just remind you to focus on the questions about, is there a legal and a political connection between these two fraught issues of net neutrality and online privacy? So with that, let's turn it over to you, Harold. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks. So I saw in the comments here, David Tott, I hope I pronounced that right, saying that he has 20 years of scars from net neutrality. And I thought, only 20 years? Because the first time I got involved in this issue on the classification of cable modem service was in 1998, when we were doing the first, what we now call the Section 706 report. So this issue has persisted, and it has continued to persist. And Title II has always lurked in the background. Net neutrality became a thing because Title II was taken out by the Powell cable modem order. we went to back to Title II in 2010 when the DC Circuit or started debating 2010 again in Title II in 2010 again when the DC Circuit said, canned the first net neutrality order. I wrote my first piece justifying why we should go back to Title II in 2008. And gave a speech on this to NARUC to 2010. Now, this isn't just to prove I've been doing this forever. The points I was making at the time and continued to believe is that we are dealing here with the critical communications infrastructure of the United States. And frankly, of the 21st century. We are dealing with the same fundamental issues that we have always wrestled with when we deal with something this important. We can now openly use the word public utility, which people recognize, even Congress in a kind of slip of the pen has recognized that this is a public utility. That does not mean what we traditionally associate with public utility rate regulation. We basically stopped doing that for telephone, which we always called the public utility. There's no reason we'd pick it up for broadband. But the issues that we care about, privacy, reliability, national security, are all tied into this in exactly the same way that they were tied into the telephone network, that they are tied into the electric grid, or anything else that is essential for us to use to participate in the modern world. Let me focus on privacy specifically. There is an incredibly long history of privacy being tied into communications. It goes back, I can quote Jewish law going back over 1,000 years, that it's a sin to read other people's mail if you're paid to carry their mail, because the privacy is important. And we have consistently applied this principle, this notion that there is a inherent in common carrier communications a duty of privacy, goes back at least 150 years in the common law. We've applied it to the telegraph. We applied it to the telephone. It's because it is the foundation of our ability to communicate. Without secure communications, without private communications, there cannot be business transactions. There cannot be personal communications. We have to be able to trust the thing that we're talking through, not to reveal our secrets. At times, not even to reveal that we are having a communication or what that endpoint of the communication is. That's one of the original provisions of the Communications Act, that if you're paid to transmit a communication by wire or radio, you are not allowed to reveal anything about that communication, even the fact of the communication, because it is so fundamentally important. So these issues have always been tied into each other. I feel like Humphrey Bogart at the end. We'll always have Paris, and if we lost it, well, we got it back now in the Biden administration. We have always needed privacy here, and I think privacy has risen to the top of national concerns. We had an attempt to have a national privacy law that did not happen. So we have a general understanding of the importance of privacy, but we have a specific concern about it in the context of our communications. And I think that is why it has come up here and now. I think similarly, national security has been having a moment, so it's important to recognize it. When we started, saying you can't have Chinese phone companies operate here in the United States because we're worried about them spying on us. You can't have Chinese equipment in your network because we're worried about it spying on us. The giant loophole of, but yeah, you can use a Chinese-owned internet service provider and be spied on, provided it uses American equipment, obviously a major problem. And so all of these things come up. Why now? Well, in some sense, they never went away. And in another sense, they are all important as we have made the internet not simply the rising means of communications, but virtually the only means of communications. So
thank you. No,
about
thank
time.
you very much. Wonderful, Harold. Great way to set the stage. And with that, we'll turn it over to Rosalind.
Thank you, Drew. It's wonderful to be here. Appreciate the invitation and my esteemed colleagues. I think we have a great, diverse panel and ideas for you and feedback. And I want to also thank Broadband Breakfast for the wonderful platform you provide on broadband policy. There's nowhere else to go on the internet to find out what's going on in the USA. All of the articles, everybody should get the newsletter. I read it every day. It's fabulous. And it's great to contribute and be part of this conversation. So I'm going to talk about two things. What's different with this particular proceeding at the FCC? And then what does Congress have to do about it, if anything? And so when we talk about, this is, as I think Harold has well explained, he's been at this for a long time, as we all have. This is the 9th iteration of the proceedings at the FCC. So what's different this time, I would say, is a lack of public interest, the lack of a problem, and the lack of justification. So when we talk about lack of interest, those of you who followed the last two proceedings, the 7th and 8th, if you will, we had in 2014, 2015, 4 million comments submitted to the FCC docket, and then another 3.2 million just after that. Now we're down to 50,000 comments. So that's quite significant because it does reflect that the sort of sense of urgency or public interest in this topic has really plummeted. It is not the same kind of a call to arms as it was in the past, and I think for good reason. First of all, we don't have a demonstrated case of a problem in the USA with regard to ISPs blocking and throttling and harming networks, harming their end users. In fact, for the whole period of the Open Internet Order, which was in place till 2017, 2018, there was one formal complaint submitted, and that was dismissed because of lack of evidence. So I have taken, over the whole period of the COVID time, went through all the records at FCC and FTC, which were publicly available, could not find formal instances of complaints. So we don't have these systematic problems that need a government intervention through Title II and FCC rules to address. So that is there. But more important, in 2018, when the Title II rules were removed, the internet got better in the US. We had record-setting auction bidding. We've had record-setting investment in broadband, in wireless and mobile, fixed line. We have greater competition. We have faster speeds. We have more technologies. The US has just surpassed South Korea for highest 5G adoption globally. We also have better value for money when it comes to broadband. So we have had tremendous improvements since those rules were removed. So it doesn't make sense to go back to a period of time when things were not so good. So, well, certainly under Title II. I mean, if you look at throughout the world, the US is a tremendous leader in broadband. Certainly on investment, we count for a quarter of the world's investment in networks, and certainly 2/3 of its innovation, of its internet sector. So it's a tremendous achievement. But when you look here at the lack of justification for a problem, the argument for this rule has been a kind of innovation argument that if we don't have these kind of ex-ante rules, the garage in Silicon Valley won't work. Now, that has been disproven in the US and certainly around the world. I've seen it with my PhD repeatedly, but basically, the major US internet companies were all founded before these rules ever were offered. And since we have removed the rules, we've had a flowering of AI startups. We've had all manner of internet startups, and the US tech companies have just grown regardless of whether these rules are in place. So there's no relationship between Title II and FCC rules and innovation. And that's really critical because now the FCC is kind of bringing forth an old wine in new bottles and saying, oh, well, we need this for national security. Now, this hits home for me because I started a think tank called China Tech Threat. I am very involved in studying the threats to networks from China, Chinese government technology. And there are 72 specific items on national security and public safety that the FCC has adopted since 2017. They're on a bipartisan, largely unanimous basis. None of them describe the need for Title II. They've actually been adopted in the wake of Title II. So again, no connection between that policy and the need for it. And we have no generals out there saying, excuse me, Senator, I can't do my job because there's not Title II on the internet. That's just an unfounded, untheorized idea. But importantly, I want to get to what we really are interested in today, which is Congress, because for the couple of dozen of countries that have net neutrality rules, you have to make specific legislation to put this in place. You need to have the Congress define what the goal is, what is the authority to do it, what are the activities you want to do, and the countries that have rules, that's what they do. Our Congress in the US has not sought to do that, but they have been extremely active on broadband, more so than at any time since 1996, and in a tremendously successful way. We've had 60 billion in subsidies for broadband brought forth through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We've had the Affordable Connectivity Program, the single most effective federal program for broadband adoption in the US history. And we have universal service reform, something the tech policy scholars have tried to do for decades. That has been done on a bipartisan basis. We have a tremendous bill in the US Senate, which is Senate 3321. This would organize or reform our contributions for rural networks, schools, libraries, hospitals, people of low income, by aligning the contributions such that the largest users of networks and the most profitable entities actually support the program. The US internet is growing at something like 1 million new users a year. Every new user that gets online and goes to these large internet platforms drives about $5,000 in digital advertising revenue. Yet the companies that benefit the most are not participating in our very important universal service programs. Right now, the seniors and the elderly of America, they're the ones who are paying for our rural broadband deployment. They are having to bear a 34% tax on top of their telephone service. This is fundamentally unfair, it's unjust, and it's not sustainable. So if we look at what Congress cares about, it doesn't want to regulate prices and traffic. It wants to stimulate the broadband adoption and investment. And that's why you see Congress moving in a bipartisan way towards subsidies for low-income end users to help support rural areas of America, to help make sure that everyone's connected, closing the digital divide. These have been tremendous successes. We can see with the, it's a non-starter to look at price controlling bits and pieces of the internet. We want America to flourish, and that's why we see Congress going in the direction that it is.
All right. Thank you so much for those thoughts and for bringing in this important other issue of USF and how it relates. But let's hear from Matt Wood and from Eric Fruits on their thoughts on net neutrality and privacy. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Drew, and thanks again for having me here, and everybody else for being here too. As we've already said, this has been around for a long time. I think that's because it's important. So there's sometimes a temptation, especially for people inside of DC, to kind of yawn and say, oh, we're tired of this issue, but the issue is still here because it's important. I would love for us to have a more reliable solution to it and not to have to flip-flop back and forth every time the administration changes, but we can talk about whether that's possible for both of these issues, right? For telecom law and for privacy too. I don't want to give short shrift to your question, Drew, about privacy, but I think you're going to hear and have already heard, the Title II proceeding at the FCC seems to be taking up more energy, more oxygen right now, just because it's something that's moving. The FTC has initiated a privacy rulemaking as well, but that's been a little slower. The FTC is less used to doing rulemakings. And Congress has tried to do comprehensive privacy bills and seems to have now gotten more satisfied with trying to take it on piece by piece. So maybe it's not just because you have a bunch of telecom folks here at the broadband breakfast, but also because privacy is just as important politically and just as big. It just has not moved as uniformly forward as this FCC has ever since Chairwoman Rosenworcel got a fifth commissioner. You know, we could talk about that if we wanted to as well, right? The fact that we went for 3 years of a 4-year presidential term without a fully seated FCC, but that's obviously a big issue that luckily we're past now. It's just the reason that everything is kind of in a high gear now and didn't get moving sooner. I'll just try to make a couple points. You know, I obviously agree with a lot of what Harold said. If you're together on a panel, you might say you want to amplify things and not straight up repeat them. So I'll try to avoid repetition. I would just say that, you know, for me, the cardinal sin of the FCC, frankly, under both parties until we got to 2015, and for the bulk of this, however we want to measure it, whether Dave in the chat talks 2 decades or Harold says, no, it's even longer than that. The biggest cardinal sin for me and Free Press's eye has been the attempt to deregulate by definition. And what do I mean by that? Well, people will argue about the need for net neutrality rules or the impact of those rules or the impact on investment of any kind of classification decision. And those are all fine and valid arguments. We can have them again here today. We can have them in lots of places. We can have them at the FCC. We have them in court. We have them on the Hill. But the question remains at the beginning, and this is really where we grounded our comments to the FCC this time, is this a telecom service? Is this something that Congress defined in 1996, meaning broadband, as Harold put it, the essential communications platform of our time? Is it performing the function that Congress defined as a telecom service? We think that answer is clearly yes, and that is a good policy outcome, but it's also the right legal outcome. This is a different service than social media platforms and search engines and all the sort of things that ride over the internet. And that we ought to have some kind of federal and comprehensive oversight of it so that it works in times of pandemic, so that it works in times of emergency, so that it works all the time for people who need to have what the law guarantees them, service at just and reasonable terms and conditions and without unreasonable discrimination. So that's really where net neutrality comes in, is that unreasonable discrimination prong. But again, we can debate which rules should apply. The biggest problem for these last couple of decades has been the attempt to take away rules and to deregulate by definition and to abdicate and say, well, this can't be a telecom service because we see that has bad impacts. Obviously, I disagree with the notion that there are any harms from the classification, but what we should do is treat it properly under the law and then debate the policies that we should implement either at the FCC or in Congress. Now, you know, as I said, it'd be great if this were settled and we didn't actually have to do it again and again and again. I think this is my 4th full time through the cycle, so I can't claim 9, but 4 times since I came to the nonprofit world from the law firms back in 2009 myself. There's a lot of rhetoric here. Obviously, you know, people will sometimes say, oh, it's the net neutrality people who've used overblown rhetoric. I would say the overblown rhetoric has been on all sides. I was very interested, since Roz brought up USF, to hear John Thune at the USF hearing last May, talking about the need to preserve the principles of universal service because they've been baked into our communications laws since the 1930s. You know, I've often been told, well, anything from the 1930s is bad. We should get rid of it. It's outdated. It's from a different era. It's from monopoly phone systems we no longer have. And yet there you had Senator Thune, the ranking member on the Republican side on the subcommittee of jurisdiction, not just tolerating, but actually embracing the fact that these universal principles have been with us, as Harold said, for almost time immemorial, but, you know, certainly throughout the last century. Does that mean they're no longer needed today? Well, I would say clearly not. We still need to have a reliable and affordable system for everybody that isn't discriminating against entrepreneurs or against individual users when they seek to use it. I'll try to wrap up and get back to privacy, but just a couple more points. You know, so it's interesting that Roz talks about lack of public interest. I think it's actually more that people don't think this is really a question anymore. I mean, it's something that has been done several times. If you go outside and you do polling, as we have, you know, 80% of people will agree with this proposition. Even 60 or 70% of Republicans agree that there ought to be some kind of regulation of broadband, that we can't just trust it to the local cable or phone company. So I think people are kind of like, why are we doing this again? It ought to have been settled. And frankly, it really was settled by the time of 2015. And then, of course, was upended by the surprise election of Donald Trump and the FCC being put into place as a result of that. I think it's interesting. You know, we've been argued to before that the FCC shouldn't make decisions based on popularity. You know, the FCC is not a democratic institution where they're supposed to be taking votes and counting a number of comments. So if now we're going to say, well, there aren't enough people commenting, when in the past ISPs especially have said that shouldn't be what's driving it, that's an interesting flip-flop, if you ask me. I think they should do the right thing, and that public comment is obviously valuable, but it's not a vote, and it's not what should be driving a decision at the FCC. And then lastly, I'll say, you know, on the investment issues and the fact that the internet has gotten better, I mean, it certainly has gotten better over time. That's what we expect from large industries and the technological upgrades and advances we've seen. Correlation does not equal causation, though. And so that I think is another cardinal sin here when people say, well, there was more investment in broadband after the repeal of the rules and the networks got better. For one thing, I would say, and I know you have network engineers and industry people who tune in here, broadband investment is not a snap decision. Nobody at Verizon or AT&T or Comcast or a smaller cable company or phone company was sitting there in 2017 and saying, now that Chairman Pai has repealed these rules, we can invest tomorrow. These are decisions made over the course of 5 or even 10 years sometimes, but we're talking 2, 3, 5, half a decade time span. So any investments that were made after the repeal in 2017 were well underway and planned for, and frankly, painstakingly detailed by the ISP's executives before that repeal came into place. So that's one thing, is that any improvements we've seen are actually based on this longer arc. The companies tell the truth when they talk to their investors about this. They just don't always say the same thing when they come to DC.
Right.
They say investment is lumpy. It goes in cycles. We invest when we need to, and then we pull back. And lastly on that, I would just say that, actually, if you look at the numbers, and obviously people can debate this too, investment actually went down every year under Chairman Pai. It hit a peak in 2017 before the rules were repealed, and then it was lower every year after that. So that means that AT&T actually, if we look at individual companies, was investing 35% less in 2020 than they invested in 2017. Comcast, a slightly smaller dip, but 20% less in 2020 than they did in 2017. And I just bring that up to say that, if we're going to pretend that correlation is causation, we actually have to look at the numbers and say, what did companies actually do in response to the change in the classification, in the regulatory framework and the rules? We can see that, yes, speeds got better, performance got better, but companies aren't trying to invest as much as they can. They actually want to invest as little as they can and provide the best product they can. And that's exactly what we saw in the wake of the repeal, was that expenditures went down, but performance got better because the investments were already made and in the ground. I can stop there. I do want to get back to privacy. And I said, Drew, I basically was self-fulfilling.
We'll bring it back in the question and answer.
Yeah,
that's fine. So
sure.
Thank you for the slice that each of you have taken on this issue. It's been very useful. Over to you, Eric, to give us your opening remarks here.
Yes, thanks, Drew, and thanks to you and Broadband Breakfast for putting this together. We spent a lot of time here talking about Title II regulation and the seesawing from having it and not having it, and that introduces a lot of uncertainty, because it appears that whenever there's a new administration across different parties, you're going to get the seesaw tipping the other way. But the other thing too about Title II is that it's just one part of a constellation of regulations that have been imposed over the past couple of years that have really had the effect of what I would call commoditizing broadband and internet. So you've got things like the nutrition labels, the all-in pricing rules, digital discrimination, Title II, the early termination fee bans that's being proposed now. Those are all ways of shaving off the different dimensions across which broadband providers compete against each other and provide services to consumers. And so you can't really just look at Title II by itself. It should be viewed as part of this bigger constellation that has some overarching effects. I think one of the areas that really gets a lot of short shrift is digital discrimination. The FCC's rules that they passed on digital discrimination are expansive, right? They cover just about everything that involves broadband or internet. You guys probably remember old movies like The Joke About the Dry Martini, where you just whisper the word vermouth over it to make a dry martini. This rule is so expansive that if you just whisper the word broadband, you are subject to the digital discrimination rules. It's really amazing, and it's everything. I mean, it involves things from promotions to pricing to investment. In some sense, you almost don't need Title II, because those digital discrimination rules are so expansive and so they're both broad and deep in terms of what they affect, that you could totally reject Title II and you could still get probably about 90% of the stuff that the current SEC would want out of Title II by some creative application of digital discrimination. And I think that's something that really doesn't get a lot of attention. I think there's two things too. The other part of it too is the uncertainty. So we talked about the seesawing across policies, but you also have a lot of uncertainty within those policies. So the big issue with Title II are the internet conduct standards, right? There's a lot of things that people have hinted that they would really like to fall under there. So for example, there's nothing in the Title II NPRM about zero rating or data caps, but you have a lot of people, even within the FCC, making noise about that, right? There's supposed to be a data caps investigation that was supposed to get started, but never really did, right? And so there's been a lot of hints that the FCC is pretty hostile to zero rating, pretty hostile to so-called data caps, but nothing in the NPRM about them, but they could easily fall under the internet conduct standard. And so that introduces a lot of uncertainty. I think there you can, again, get creative with digital discrimination and try to shoehorn zero rating bans and data cap bans into those digital discrimination rules. That imposes a lot of uncertainty because we don't know what this FCC or future FCC is going to do. You know, you could take the current FCC at the word about forbearance, but you never know what the next FCC or subsequent FCCs are going to do. And that introduces a lot of uncertainty, not just in the regulatory framework, but within the regulatory framework. I don't want to take too much time because I want to get to some of the Q&A, but turning to privacy, you know, it's telling that the NPRM for the Title II regulation kind of treats privacy as an afterthought. If you read through it carefully, they don't really connect the dots and explain specifically how they could improve privacy with public utility style regulation of broadband internet. It's just more kind of speculative, like, oh, we could do things and make people better and protect their privacy. And it's like, okay, well, let's have a kumbaya moment. I think you also have another problem with Congress. I think Congress has had 15, 20 years to decide whether broadband should be regulated under Title II, and they haven't. By default, they have essentially said, we have no problem with the swinging between Title II and not being determined by the FCC. I think really they should fish or cut bait on that one and decide whether or not broadband should be regulated under Title II. I think another area where Congress needs to revisit would be on digital discrimination. I think they need to more clearly identify what they mean by digital discrimination, what the scope of it is. And I really think, just based on my research, they should cut out the part where income is considered a protected class. And that's not because I don't think that income is an important issue. It's because it's a very mischievous issue. You have a lot of federal, state, and local broadband policies that are explicitly designed to discriminate based on income. You know, you have programs that provide subsidies and other benefits to low-income consumers to help them get broadband access. Technically, that is a violation of digital discrimination because there's no distinction between good discrimination and bad discrimination. I think that needs to be clarified by Congress. I think that would be the easiest thing for them to do. Politically, the hardest thing for them to do would be to, you know, again, fish or cut bait on whether Title II should be applied to broadband. And so with that, I wanted to give you guys some time.
Thank you for giving back time. That's kind of you, Eric. So even though this is not officially a debate, we are going to kind of, let's let the other side take 2 minutes and respond, and then we'll let this side, that is, say, Harold and Matt, do the same before I've got a bunch of questions. And we've obviously got a lot of questions from our audience. Thank you for putting your questions in the Q&A. Do so. I will go by most upvoted. So incentive to upvote questions. So Rosalind, you wanted to respond.
Yes, so I want to thank all the panelists. I think they put all these great points on the table. I think just one other, as we're table setting, in the background here, there's many of us are looking at this major questions doctrine, this idea that Congress, the famous saying, you don't hide the elephants in the mouse holes, right? That if Congress really wanted to do this, it will make it explicit. And there are some Supreme Court cases which could implicate what's going on at the FCC. So interestingly, Congress has had many opportunities where it could define what it wanted to with regard to net neutrality. And remember, there's nothing in the Communications Act that says open internet or net neutrality. There's no discussion of blocking, throttling, and so forth. So Congress has done a lot. It could have taken through the IIJA or the other laws that's adopted to describe this, and has chosen not to. I think the digital discrimination point is correct. I mean, there you do have Congress describing it. We can certainly debate. It seems a little bit ambiguous there. I know that we got great lawyers on the call, but these things are going to be, there's a discussion now that the FCC itself could be litigated for how it's either interpreting or over-interpreting this, because it's up to Congress to say whether and how we regulate the internet on any of these items. And then, I think just as an important point here, internationally, India, the world's largest country, they have revamped their telecom law, a major movement since 1887. Everything is a telecom service, including the internet, meaning WhatsApp is considered as a telecom service. So they have taken the same point where you should say, oh, telecom is different, it's transmission. The Indian parliament disagrees with that notion. They actually think everything that's IP can be regulated under telecom. So, I know we all want to take our sides and pick and choose, but different countries are going to look at these things differently and democratically. So that makes this topic very exciting. And that's why we're here today.
All right, let's get Harold get a rebuttal in here too for 2 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
Just really quick, because there were a lot of points. I don't read the digital discrimination order that way, but I will point out, as somebody who has long advocated for something like that, it replaces Section 202. So it's actually the other way around. If I had Title II, I wouldn't necessarily have needed a separate digital discrimination statute. But because Congress can't get its act together, we did that because Congress could apparently agree that digital discrimination is bad. There are an equal number of resolutions on either side of this, so I'm not sure what to make of congressional inaction. Scalia always scoffed at the notion that congressional inaction can tell us something, and I agree. In our comments, I think we listed every Blackburn and Wicker and Thune bill that was essentially the same as the COPE Act in 2006, of we're just going to have 4 principles. We're not going to let the FCC do any rulemaking, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'll put the Markey bills on one side and the Blackburn bills on the other side of things Congress couldn't do, and they even out. What it tells me is that Congress is dysfunctional, not that Congress had a preference for one or the other by not doing it. I've written a lot on major question doctrine and will argue this about Chevron. I think I'll just point out here that in the court interpretations before the cable modem order, 2 were for one. Ninth Circuit was telecommunications service. Fourth Circuit was a telecommunications facility under the Cable Act, didn't reach the question of the type of service. The district courts that considered this in 3 different district courts all came up with cable service. No one came up with information service until Powell thought of it. So if we're going to chuck major question doctrine and, and chuck Chevron and go with the best interpretation of the statute as a bunch of judges thought of it, then we're going to go with the either telecommunication service or cable service. We're not going to have information service. Last thing I'll just say real quick is one of the things is the Brandex came up a bunch in the arguments over the questions about the Chevron doctrine. And, there was a lot in it that we could talk about just that. But I will mention that one of the things that was important is, so if you look at the question of the definition, it's the question of what is the offer. And the notion that was advanced by Wheeler in 2016, that is advanced here in 2023-24, is that the nature of the offer has changed since Excite at Home was the portal. And let me tell you, read those old cases from before Brandex. They rely a lot on the fact that there's Excite at Home. That's a cable content service. Are we really saying that we want stability in the form of freezing the internet in what it was in 1998 or 99 when Excite at Home was the way we got to it? we need to recognize things change. There is value in some flexibility, and that at the end of the day, we're going to need a bunch of rules, things that Congress doesn't foresee. And that's what the FCC was designed to do. That's what the administrative process is designed to do, and it should be allowed to run its course and do it.
All right, let's pull in some questions here. I know you all have things you want to say, and that's great. But we want to let the audience have a say. Jim Mercanti asks, it would be interesting to hear comments and opinions on why ISPs are so stridently opposed to both net neutrality and regulations regarding digital discrimination. Who would like to take that question?
I mean, I can offer some opinions. I'm
Please,
sure
go ahead.
others will have some. I'll try to be brief here too. I think so. In the 2014, 2015 round, something about ISPs changing their tune and saying, oh, we're actually okay with this. We like that neutrality. That's why you get bills from people like John Thune and Marsha Blackburn over the years. All to say, I don't think there's that much terror over net neutrality rules per se, even though people would argue about how far they should go, what they should cover. What they say now about classification is that rate regulation will kill investment. And I would point to the last several years and say a couple things. Not only have we seen investment continue to flow as it ought to, based on the demands on the service and also based on technological upgrades, but that there's no prospect for rate regulation here, right? I mean, some people might wish that there were, but that's the entire history here. And that's when I say we can't have deregulation by definition. We've certainly had a lot of deregulation. The FCC has not only stopped regulating non-dominant carriers, but even dominant carriers in telecom company parlance in any of these respects. So I think that's the main thing driving them is fear of rate regulation that could change the margins that they can then report to Wall Street. Digital discrimination, I mean, it's interesting to hear Eric say that we should revisit the income discrimination definition because that's right in the statute that Congress passed as part of the IIJA. But I don't know how the FCC could go and say, well, we're not going to follow that part of the law. But I think, what I've seen there is more of a, at least if you want to listen to Senator Cruz, sort of a fear of disparate impact litigation and findings that without intent to discriminate, companies could still be liable for discrimination. And of course, I think public knowledge and free press support the notion that, yes, we ought to be looking at impacts and not just at intent.
Yeah, just to amplify what Matt said,
Go ahead, please.
I didn't say that the FCC should revisit the income component because it is written in the IIJA, but I was thinking that would be at least one kind of low-hanging fruit that Congress can address is how to whether they should take that out or address it in a more specific way, because I think that's really problematic. I think you can have debates whether disparate impact or intentional discrimination should apply. We've written that it should be intentional discrimination rather than disparate impact because all the problems with disparate impact in terms of if you look for it, you're going to find it. But the bigger problem is especially when you have income as a protected class, there are so many things that are correlated with it, and I guarantee you will find discrimination based on income because as Ronald Coase said, if you torture data long enough, it'll confess.
Right.
So you've got that.
Let's keep getting some more questions in here.
I'm sorry?
Let's keep it moving.
Okay.
We got a lot more questions that I want to pull in. So bring those points as we respond to others. I want to ask Marina Cortez's question. Is there scope for collaboration within IEEE standards on the subjects of net neutrality in the context of online privacy and broadband policy? If so, is there a particular IEEE standard that you have in mind? And we do have a response from Jason Livengood on that, but I'd love the panelists' thoughts. Do the standards bodies have anything to say helpfully on these subjects?
There's a big question of measurements, which I think is important. And for any sorts of traffic flows, I mean, first of all, one of my problems and one of the reasons I'd like to see the FCC have some oversight authority is everything. I don't know that everything works great. I'm told by people who have an interest in telling me that everything works great, that it works great, and I can't actually verify it anyway. I have the same problem with the digital platforms, by the way, which is why I've proposed a regulator for digital platforms. I don't choose a side. I go after both sides. But I think that there is a role here of standards bodies in providing metrics and frameworks for looking at these things. When we talk about, particularly when we get into what does it mean to have equivalent service? And we want to do things like measure the quality of service that's being offered in one neighborhood rather than another neighborhood. It's important to know what we're talking about. If we actually want to know whether there appears to be consistent and systemic discrimination based on content or type of content or in favor of particular providers. We're unlikely to get anything as ham-handed as what Comcast did in 2007, 2008, when it just blocked peer-to-peer applications.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I think there's a role. They're not regulators, but there's a role.
Rosalind, do you want to chime in on this subject?
Yes. So, I want to share that when I did my PhD of 50 countries over 5 years, I identified there were different models of doing this, and we had multi-stakeholder model. That was quite a valuable way to look at things, that, we could have a sense of, consensus standards and how the ISPs would manage their networks. And interestingly, many countries, UK, Denmark, the Nordic countries, they all evolved a set of quality standards, which actually exceeded what a number of regulators proposed. So, it's not a fait accompli that only the FCC knows how to do it. In fact, you can have industries can work together to say, this is the goal that you want to achieve, here's how that we can go. I think it's valuable to look at countries like Australia and New Zealand, which have always managed this issue with competition law. They have, for example, in Australia, a national broadband network, but have not wanted to do a kind of net neutrality. Interestingly, in Europe, where I live, we've had this since 2015, and the United Kingdom, when they left the European Union, the Ofcom, very well respected telecom regulator, said the rules adopted in Europe have harmed consumers, they have harmed investment, and they've harmed innovation, particularly because through COVID, people could not get free internet service for health and education. They had to suspend their rules. And then on top of that, they said, even when things are made very explicit in legislation, there has still been a chilling effect on the ISPs not being able, they're afraid to offer innovative services because they're afraid they'll be sued. And now the regulator has to modernize the policy and say, look, consumers should be able to get premium offers or free offers and so on. So, of course, we want to have legislation and things that are clear, but in practice, these things are difficult.
Matt, do you want to respond to this point about international?
I mean, yes and no. It's such a grab bag. There's nothing that I understand in any net neutrality regime anywhere that would prohibit low cost or free service to users, unless you're talking about, to only use it for specific apps and websites, right? So like that has been prohibited sometimes if we're talking about zero rating, but there's no reason. And in fact, we saw this during the pandemic here. I think this would have happened whether or not Chairman Pai had repealed the rules, and ISPs can obviously offer a more affordable service to people. And as we probably agree on, they've gotten subsidies to do just that, right? So like, I think there's just a lot of red herrings here in the salad we're hearing.
Let me bring in, I'll let you chime in, Harold, but I want to bring in Rita Habib's question about on the privacy front, comparing the US with Europe. In the United States, there's almost no privacy compared with Europe. And obviously we've seen GDPR has like kind of driven, European initiatives have driven whatever limited policies there are in the United States on privacy. What are the best practices that the US needs to adopt? So I know I'm forcing a privacy question on you, but how does that fit in the context of what we've talked about thus far? Harold, I'll let you tackle.
I'll take privacy. I mean, and again, privacy is something of a grab bag because Europe is actually improving its privacy regime. They're constantly looking at things like how you do enforcement and what works and what doesn't. And there's, movement away from a notice regime as recognizing that that's become very difficult for consumers. So yeah, the other thing is we're not uniform about privacy here in the US. We have different regimes for different I'd argue that something like HIPAA in the medical realm, certain of the financial rules, CP&I here for telecom work reasonably well, in some ways better than GDPR. When we look at kind of what we should and shouldn't be adopting from Europe or any of these other countries, I think that we have to learn a lot from what's worked and what hasn't. What has worked is the requirements that you can't force users to give up their personal information as the cost of getting to the service. The EU pushed back on Facebook and others that basically said, unless you can choose to make your personal information known or not, and if you choose not, then you don't get access to the service. That is something the EU has pushed back on, and the service have responded by saying, okay, well, we'll have a version where we will charge some fee that makes up for not getting the premium. That's an interesting approach. I'm not sure that I agree that that's how we should do it. There are problems with the pay for privacy. So my point is, there are things that work over there, things that do not work over there that we need to be looking at. I think the enforcement issue is still a question. I think the relying on consumers to be able to sort through all the consents in places where the EU has prohibited companies from being, kind of take it or leave it sorts of things on privacy. I think those are models we should be looking at.
All right, quick response from Rosalind and then from Matt. Very quick, because I've got at least 2 more questions I want to ask.
Yes, so just in, quick thing as a shorthand, we like to say US innovates, China replicates, and Europe regulates. And, certainly European policymakers are very proud of GDPR because it's a de facto global standard, certainly not optimal. And if you look at the enforcements, they are mirroring a lot of where the US has strong privacy rules already. So I think part of the be careful what you wish for is the American privacy bar wants to have these big payouts, thinking that's what you get with GDPR. But that is not what's happening in Europe, because we don't have the kind of the capability to have these payouts. That's not the way that it works. And there are still concerns around a GDPR type framework in the US. Does it work with the Constitution? Does it violate the free speech? There's a number of issues there that are not resolved. And, again, I think Congress has looked at this, and it's difficult to get the stakeholders to agree.
All right, Matt, quick response.
Yeah, I mean, again, so I want to focus on the US again and say that the question here is not whether we should have comprehensive privacy, but who's going to provide it, I think. And, where I think we get often whipsawed is, well, Congress ought to act, so the agency should freeze in place. And there's some legal reasons they have to do that as well, because let's not forget that the FCC's 2016 broadband privacy rules were subject to a CRA, a resolution of disapproval. But, from a consumer advocate standpoint, what we can't have is, well, Congress should do it, but never will. Agencies aren't allowed to do it because they'll get it wrong. And so therefore we freeze in place and do nothing. And I feel like that's where we've been sitting for too much of the last couple of decades on the privacy side, is waiting for somebody to take the ball and run with it when nobody has so far. The states have, but not at the federal level.
So I'm going to ask 2 questions. There were many questions. Obviously, thank you everyone for bringing your questions. A lot of good, and many have been answered in this discussion, the chat forum. But I'm going to read these 2, and then I'm going to invite each of our panelists to answer one or both of them in the same order that we started with, and that will have to be our kind of final salvo here. So the questions are, one from Jim Mercanti. He asks about internet subscription costs. Is there a realization, understanding that for many seniors and low-income citizens, any costs above $5 a month is untenable? And how does this impact the issues we've been talking about in terms of Congress's focus on this and ISPs? All right, so I know a bit off topic, but a good question, was starred by many or upvoted by many. And then Dan Grossman has a good question, many good questions, but one is, states occasionally investigate Title II carriers for failing to maintain their networks and usually order remediation. Does the lack of Title II regulation take a tool away from the states for ensuring service reliability for BIAS, broadband internet access services? These are both in the Q&A. Let's let Harold and then Rosalind, Matt, and Eric answer whichever ones they want as closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tackle this last one, which is that the interaction between the states and Title II classification has been very interesting. In a number of states, there was a big push by ISPs to get legislation passed very early that prohibited states from regulating any IP-based service that under state law classified broadband as an information service, or which explicitly tied the definition of broadband to the FCC's definition. So on the other hand, as we saw with California and Washington and Oregon, and again, when we talk about why aren't we seeing anything, the three big West Coast states all have rules that prohibit it. So that may have something to do with it. Europe prohibits it. Three big West Coast states prohibit it. Canada prohibits it. That doesn't mean the other issues aren't important, but anyway, not to get too distracted.
Thanks. And bottom line is, the states have taken up the charge, right? With the failure of Congress to act, states are doing it. And so that's really kind of keeping things in check from your perspective. Rosalind, which ones do you want to take care?
Yes, well, let me take ACP, or what I would say, that question about the elderly. I thank you so much for that question. Very important. We need affordability is an important issue, particularly for our seniors. I think we have a once in a generation opportunity with look at Senate Bill 3321, which has USF reform. The financial models in that bill can help us not only sustain the universal service program, to provide the affordable connectivity going forward. Those are the two critical things. They're more important than net neutrality and the other privacy discussions. Making sure affordability is there is what really matters. And I want to thank Broadband Breakfast so much for the time today. Please go to my website, rosalindlayton.com, where you can see my comments on this, filed with China Tech Threat and the Foundation for American Innovation.
Matt, what would you like to focus on?
Well, yeah, I mean, just on affordability as well in the ACP program. I mean, there is bipartisan agreement there. I do think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We don't need to say, well, we do this, but the other things are less important, or we can't do them all, because people need networks that are secure and non-discriminatory and affordable. And that's what Title II allows for. It's kind of funny that people say, well, we want to have affordable networks, but we can't have a law requiring that. God forbid we do that. We need to just hope that it happens in some other way, or we need to throw money at the problem. Free Press, though, we've been big ACP supporters and doing it in that market-based, almost voucher-like framework. So oftentimes people on the Hill will say that we're radicals here at Free Press, and I say we're such radicals, we're espousing 1990s Republican ideals. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, is competition and market-based incentives to allow people to afford these services that are so crucial, and that's why renewing ACP is actually very important.
Harold, do you have 30 seconds you want to say before we give Eric the last word?
One of the things that is annoying is that folks try to have this both ways. Broadband is so important. We should spend $42 billion on it and another $6 billion on affordability, but not regulate it because it's not so important that we ought to make sure that it works right, or that the public gets something back. Either we care about this, in which case we care all the way and we care about resiliency, reliability, national security, privacy, et cetera, or we don't. But not just give me the money and then back off.
Right. Okay. Eric, let's give you a few minutes.
Well, I'll do the affordability too. I think the ACP does not do a good job of getting people who are unsubscribed or not subscribed to subscribe. I mean, that's fairly clear. The FCC is supposed to be tracking it. They don't. But I think that argument is actually a bad argument, because based on that question, the real benefit of the ACP is keeping people, low-income people who are subscribed, keeping them subscribed. And I think if you look at the history of that program, that was really the intent. It wasn't to bring new people on, because the bottom line is, I've seen surveys of people who are who don't have internet connections, and you ask them, what price would you get connected? The price is often zero. I mean, they don't want to pay for it all. My wife is a friend who's a shopaholic, and her way of deciding whether she should buy something is, if it was free, would you take it? And so, I mean, it's the same sort of thing. There are some people who will not take broadband internet, even if it was free, because they don't see the value to it. And so you just have to accept that. But the ACP does a very good job of keeping those people who want it, keeping them enrolled. And that's why I'm really worried about this. The wind down that's going to be happening any day now.
Yeah, tomorrow, meaning tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, a subject for another day. We appreciate our audience for sticking with us a few additional minutes. Thank you to our panelists, to Harold Feld, to Rosalind Layton, Matt Wood, and Eric Fruits. A reminder that next week we'll be streaming live from Philadelphia for National Digital Inclusion Alliance's Net Inclusion. And don't miss the Broadband Measurement Summit here in Washington on March 7th. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.